Hello and welcome to our LinkedIn Live. We love a LinkedIn Live here. It's great to have you here, and a really interesting topic that we're going to be talking about today: maintaining resilient ethics and values under pressure when we're decision making. And this is part of an introduction to our HRBP's free Lunch and Learn. So if you're an HRBP, you need to be at this one on April the 27th. And Ben, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because we're diving into something that in reality every HRBP faces, but we don't always talk about explicitly. And that's how we maintain ethical clarity and good judgment under pressure. I work with lots of organisations and leadership teams, and I watch this play out. It's fascinating. And I think the truth is, organisations aren't black and white, are they? They sit in that very uncomfortable grey space where commercial pressure, stakeholder expectations, time constraints tend to collide. That's exactly why I'm so delighted to be joined by Ben Wilforth-Ritchie, and he's the founder of Facilitate, who specialises in helping improve decision-making quality in complex, high-stakes environments. But Ben, I know you've got a really interesting perspective because whilst you've got deep expertise in ethics, you've also got real-life experience inside FTSE 100 organisation. So this isn't just theory, is it? It's grounded in what actually happens in organisations. So tell us a bit about you and how you got to be doing what you do.
Absolutely. And thank you, Gillian, for the conversation. Ethics is best done in dialogue live. Ethics is usually done after an event with a very reflective element. So it's really nice to be able to talk through some case studies today and to explain a little bit about how an everyday habit of ethics, thinking through things in the moment before issues become crises, is really important for HR business partners, but also anyone working in an organization.
Yeah, I think you're so right. It's that being caught on the spot, isn't it? And thinking, I wish I'd thought about this earlier because I'm not quite sure which direction I need to take this into.
Absolutely. And look, we all love foresight and we all wish we could see the future and understand how to approach it better. But life doesn't work out like that. And to your question around a bit of my background, I didn't expect 10 years after leaving university to be running an ethical consultancy supporting businesses with their decision making. I did philosophy as a degree. I'm really keen to apply the theory practically in business. And that's what I've done through my roles in aerospace and defense. I've worked as a project manager. I've worked in procurement when we first met, Gillian, all those years ago. So category management and purchasing. I've worked in internal audit again when we worked together. And it's about understanding how to approach problems. And gently through testing these roles, I've understood that those theories that we learn about in philosophy that have been around for thousands of years and still apply today are just as applicable in business. It's just about framing it in a way that says, here's a problem. This might be a way to approach it. Let's test that. Let's almost have a bit of fun. And if we fail, great, we've learned how not to do it. But if we succeed, even better, because we've avoided a crisis. So that's really my background, is the academic philosophy applied through a good 7.5 years working in aerospace and defense, most recently as an ethics manager and chief of staff. So I've absolutely worked with and understood the complex operational environments that HR business partners, procurement practitioners, anyone in business needs to operate under to deliver on their projects.
Yes, and whilst we promised ourselves we wouldn't get political today, you can't ignore the geopolitical environment that we're operating in and how applicable that is to what's going on. But we'll keep it to other topics just for today. And I think you're so right, because often when people think about ethics, they think ethics hotline, something has happened within a business. We need to deal with this in the right way. Whereas what we're talking about is real time application of ethics, aren't we? And how that works. Before we get into the framework and tools, I'd love to start with a bit of context because you often talk about focusing on decision quality rather than compliance. And I think that's quite a powerful distinction there.
Yes, it is. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to separate compliance and ethics. Compliance have the rules and processes, and they have operations in place to understand when those rules and processes may have been broken or when lines have been crossed. And that's really important. But ethics, to me, is about nurturing good critical thinking to support resilient decision making. It's much more fluid. So whilst you have good frameworks to operate under, it's about saying in the moment, you as the leader, as the HR business partner, as the project manager, you are the person that needs to make this decision. So how do we nurture you to make the right one or the best one, given all of these variables around you? And decision resilience is something which, or decision quality, is something which I think rests on a number of different factors. I've developed my framework based on some behavioral psychology, so some theory around how people do or don't approach problems, a cognitive bias, which relates to the world of DE&I and how we naturally approach the world and who we naturally speak to, decision making under stress, because it's not like every situation is calm and composed, and we have that condor moment of going, chaos has ensued, I'm going to pause, good, and let's approach it in this way. There's always some challenge to overcome there. But decision quality means that you're thinking about all of these things in a measured way. And the more that you build that into habit by practicing it over and over again, the more it's likely to apply when the chaos is happening around you. And that's what I'd really like to help organizations with, is practice this as much as you can with some really helpful frameworks centered in good theory that's practically applied. And the more you do that, the more that your decision quality will improve.
I think you're so right. And that fluidity, and I was picturing many situations, particularly where perhaps leaders have got quite blinkered about what they're going to do because there's time pressure, they want delivery to happen, and the interjections coming from people may hint at this could slow down the process if we stop and take a look at our decision making. And that's when that kind of tension starts to arrive. And I think that this is where it really resonates for HRBPs, because they often might be in the room and they don't have that same blinkered approach to the delivery, and they can kind of step to one side and think, hang on, there are other things I can see happening here.
It's
Isn't
completely
it?
that. It's completely that perspective you gain from being outside of the in the moment chaos that might be happening, or the in the moment pressure, and being able to advise really well. When I was working in ethics management, I partnered very closely with HR because partnerships and influence is crucial to the role. And being able to identify where a root cause might be and how that's impacting the actual problem that's occurred, that's really important. But yeah, I've had people tell me, Ben, I don't need my people to think, I need them to do. So what do I need ethics for? And in those moments, any advisor, whether an ethics one or an HR advisor or anyone, needs to pause and go, how do we help individuals who are so focused on delivery understand thinking well is going to support them in that?
I can feel all the HRBPs out there going, oh, yes, that happened to me this morning. Because it is about pressure, isn't it? And if we were to explore a little bit more that pressure, because I don't think leaders wake up thinking, I'm going to go make some unethical decisions today. Yeah. There's a lot of factors there. What do you see as some of the biggest ethical pressure points in organizations?
The first is delivery, because we've just mentioned that. I think that it's very natural and quite right that organizations need to deliver on their commitments. Of course, we need to manufacture products to time and to budget, sell them to customers in the right way at the right cost, make money so that we can reinvest and pay our staff and deliver for shareholder value. But that isn't aside from or in contrast to ethical principles and the right way of acting. And so when directors, leaders, individuals in business feel that pressure to deliver at all costs, that's the moment we need to pause, because where is our red line there? An example is if
Yeah.
a CEO walks into a room and says, we've got to deliver this project, do whatever it takes. How will someone respond? Does do whatever it takes mean hire more people and spend more money increasing the team size? That seems reasonable. Does it mean actually cutting the team by half to increase profits, reduce costs, and maybe overwork the team? Ooh, now we're getting a bit shifty. Does it mean pay a bribe to make sure that we get and win the contract? Probably not. So suddenly the words that we're using and the pressures that are placed on us actually need some interpretation. We can't just take them at face value. So pressure is really important. That links into another ethical pressure, which is purpose drift. Many organizations and individuals, like you say, Gillian, they'll come into work, they don't mean to be unethical, and they'll have a purpose. I want to repair my ship. I want to create a new product. I want to deliver a great workshop for my clients. But then something will happen and they'll go, oh, maybe I could do it like this. And their purpose drifts a little bit, almost unnoticeably, but it's slightly to the side. I'll give an example. If you're a charity and you're there to look after your community, your local community, and an organization that wants to run a shop on your community says, we'll give you 100 grand. And you think, we need that 100 grand, but we're not quite sure this business is aligned to our principles. But this one time we'll do it. And then next month, another business comes along and you think, oh, they're offering another 100 grand. We'll do it this one time. Over the 12 months, you've got 12 businesses that now aren't aligned to your community. And yes, you might have made 1.2 million, and that's important as a charity. But what have you given up? What purpose have you drifted from through these small engagements? So I think those are two really big ones. The pressure points we have from delivery, the purpose drift from small moments of interactions we don't think about at the time, but in the grand scale of things, remove us from our purpose.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I was wondering whether as well, when people are in that frame of mind, like, let's deliver, if you've got an HRBP standing aside going, wait a minute, feels a bit like being told off. And then they kind of dig their heels in the ground even more, thinking, don't you come at me with all that, HR fluffy stuff and stuff like that. And hence, I think then it makes people sometimes a bit nervous about making the challenge. And I think that other point you just made about drift is so important. So I think, as you say, often a lot of organisations don't notice it until it's kind of a bit embedded, and that's become a natural behaviour. And when it starts at the top with the leaders and then it gets cascaded down, the next team down think, this is how we should be behaving. So it can take quite a lot to turn things around, I think.
It absolutely can. It absolutely can. And to support that HR business partner guidance, if you see incentives in your business distorting your purpose, distorting your ethical decision making, that's a great moment for an HR business partner in the right way to say, what are we incentivizing here? Is it bonuses based on delivery at all costs? How do we address that? Is it the commercial team is only there for this charity to bring in money, or are they thinking about the values and principles we're aligning to? And simply asking that question allows you to go, oh, there might be some incentive distortion here. We might have a purpose drift that's been identified. What can we do about it?
I think you're right, and often it may be that HRBPs need to introduce what I call some cognitive dissonance there. So rather than directly challenging, as you say, asking those right questions to just stop and get them think, like, I'm just wondering how this aligns with our values, or I'm just wondering what could happen if this became public, or something like that. And I think that, as you look at examples and things like that, what you said earlier was so important. Not necessarily rehearsal, but being prepared for this. And I think HRBPs to the side have to kind of constantly be thinking, what are the what ifs in this situation? And how can I think through and perhaps preempt some of them before it gets so far down the road that kind of the bulldozer's on its way to deliver something and nothing is going to stop it until it crashes. But Ben, I know that you have been working on some really practical frameworks, and we'll be looking at these in our workshop on the 27th of April. So I wondered if you could just walk us through a simple version, give us a taster of the ethical decision making framework.
Absolutely. So to support us with this, I'll just share my screen because we've got a one pager that I think will be really useful for HR business partners on the call to use and think about. And this framework is designed to help you stress test your ethical decision making, your ethical decision resilience under pressure. There are 8 different pillars in this framework, and it helps you understand that there is a method to ensuring that even when the stakes are high and even when there's pressure on you and your leaders, there is a way to run through this challenge in a more considered and more appropriate way. So I'll start with purpose. This is where purpose drift comes in, and it's a really key pillar. Are we staying true to our values? How are we ensuring that those purposes that we align with us as an organization are being delivered in practice? And you can just ask, is this decision aligned with our strategic intent, values, and culture? A simple question like that really helps to say, if not, why not? If so, good, we can proceed. And that second one, risk, is absolutely crucial. Risk visibility. Have we considered all of the risks that we might have here? Now, financial risks are regularly considered. Reputational risks, maybe less so. Ethical risks, perhaps even less. So just ask, what are we overlooking? Where are our blind spots? That third one, escalation, is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of this framework. Escalation integrity comes down to, are we hearing all the concerns? Do people feel safe and supported challenging decisions of leadership and other people? And if not, how do we create a valuable speak up culture? Because if people aren't raising their concerns, an ethical challenge will occur. And we can cover some case studies later, Gillian, about how this has happened, what the results are. But that's really crucial, that one there. The fourth element, stakeholders who will be impacted. This comes down to the theory I was explaining earlier around, are we looking purely at business benefit, shareholder impact, or are we thinking about our people as well, our employees, our customers, our communities? Working with charities in this space, I've had a really enjoyable time because their purpose is the stakeholders in the communities we serve, and it's so important to consider that. But they must also consider their own employees and their duty to making sure they're a viable business model as well. So the stakeholder element, who is actually going to be impacted by this? The fifth one, systems and incentives. We've covered a little bit around whether we're incentivizing the right behaviors. If we have a financial structure that rewards and gives bonuses to people who simply deliver, but it doesn't look at how they deliver, we might be missing a trick. And sometimes unethical behavior is not the result of someone deliberately doing something with intent. It's that the systems are encouraging them to cut corners. Perhaps they're too complex, perhaps they're too difficult, or they're not appropriate. Question your systems constantly. Unintended consequences relates to stakeholder engagement, relates to risk, and it's looking forward to understand what is the impact of our decision and what are the ripple effects here. What could go wrong next? If you're working as an HR business partner in an AI company or a tech company, this is a really important one for you, because as your company grows, a small decision today could turn into a massive decision later, because you will grow and grow and grow at a huge rate. So let's think forward around, how could this ripple into other areas we haven't considered? And then you consider the seventh pillar, reversibility. Can this be undone? Now, what often happens in high stakes decision making is these decisions that you make now cannot be undone. And who bears the impact of that? Links to stakeholder consequences. If it can be, great, perhaps there's less risk. If it can't, do we need to pause and reconsider what we're doing here? And the final one is really, really valuable too, and is usefully explained as the newspaper test. How will this look externally? But we also like to think, what happens if a whistleblower gets hold of this and releases it to the public because they tried to raise something internally, but your escalation integrity wasn't there. Or perhaps we didn't consider all the impact to stakeholders. What would happen if this went under parliamentary review, or it was on the front page of the Times, or your community that you're meant to be serving realizes that you've done something that doesn't serve their interests? It's a really valuable test, this, to say, would we be confident explaining this to someone else without that little blush of embarrassment or without trying to sideline the issue? So these are the 8 pillars of the framework that I've introduced recently. And Gillian, I think to your earlier points around how can the advisory element of an HR business partner really support leadership and the business? If you step by step go through this framework, you will have greater decision resilience and a greater understanding of how your outcome is hopefully a better one for the business, but also all of the communities with which you serve.
Ben, thank you so much for sharing that. There are so many pennies that dropped as you went through that framework. There are so many things that were going through my mind. You were so right about the risk mitigation. People put financial risk first, and other risks always higher up the scale, and how rarely I see ethical risk on a risk register. So I think that's key. And there's been so much in the press lately which makes us think, God, that really should have been high, like your last pillar of how would it look if this got out. But because of the work that we do within DEI, both of us, and I know very dear to your heart too, and a lot of the work that we do, and certainly I'm delivering lots of workshops at the moment on psychological safety in an inclusive culture. That one about escalation integrity and do we hear everyone? And when I talk to people about psychological safety, and there's kind of a 4-box framework, there's always a 4-box framework in a workshop. And one of them might be learner safety, etc., but one of them is challenger safety. And this is the one that I always find people say, yeah, we kind of struggle sometimes upwards. And I know that a lot of people might say, as leaders, doors are always open, we listen to our people, but do they really? And I know we're going to have a look at a few case studies, but I do remember, and I won't go into the details because so many people out there will remember it and will have seen films about it. The NASA case study, when they looked at what happened when it was Challenger, wasn't it, that blew up? Was it Challenger that blew up?
I think so, yeah.
And they have the school teacher on it. It was a long, long time ago. And I remember watching the film and doing quite a lot of thought around it. And, the engineer who had found a problem with the O-rings and the testing of the O-rings and knew that launch shouldn't happen. But the kind of political pressure, the president was going to make a speech about it. We had a school teacher, we had all this going, it was all being televised. And because he wasn't listened to enough, and because the way that meeting was handled, the launch went off. And I remember seeing him interviewed, I think maybe his name was Beaujolais, something like that. Or maybe I've got wine on the brain, I don't know, forgive me if I do. It absolutely ruined him, because he, couldn't stop thinking about, should I have tried harder? But he couldn't be heard. And I think that kind of happens a lot, particularly for HRBPs. You've looked at quite a few case studies, so have I. So what comes to the forefront of your mind when you think about case studies where they should have had your framework, Ben? Applied it.
That's the first thing that I wish we could apply. And like with hindsight, I think we can always look back and say, if they had, what I'd like to encourage people to do is please don't get to that stage. Yeah. Get something in beforehand that gives you the confidence that when issues occur, because no framework can stop issues from happening. Okay. What frameworks can help with, and what critical thinking throughout the whole of human history has helped with, is stopping those issues becoming real crises. And one thing that I'd love to encourage people to do is that don't think that just because you have the job title ethics manager or head of ethics or even HRBP, that you are the only person whose responsibility it is to think ethically. Everyone has that responsibility and accountability, because ethics reveals to the people around us the character that we're portraying, the person that we wish to be. And therefore, if there are moments where you think, I'm not sure about this decision, or the outcome of this decision might make me feel embarrassed or as though I haven't lived up to my standards, then you're not exposing the person you really wish to be. You're not living up to that standard. So that's really important. The in example you've given there of NASA relates very closely to another example, which is Boeing and the 737 MAX disasters. So in that scenario, again, engineers in the company spoke up about problems with one of their sensors that Boeing had installed on planes to deal with a known mechanical issue. And when those engineers spoke up, they were either ignored or they were silenced. And as a result, hundreds of people died in 2 plane crashes. Now, when an investigation occurred after the crashes, Boeing was charged with a criminal conspiracy to defraud the US government. And it cost Boeing $2.5 billion in fines and many more billions of dollars in lost revenue and lost customer trust. Now, if you go through this and say, okay, let's think about the framework I walked us through. Are we staying true to our purpose? Well, Boeing is there to provide safe products for people to travel on. And if those products crash, we're probably not aligned to our purpose. Are we thinking about all the risks here? Well, the risk to life was massive. And people actually said at the time, we think planes are going to crash and we think people will die. And the company's decision was progress anyway. So maybe not good risk visibility there, but the escalation integrity was totally lacking. People did speak up, so that's a positive, but were they listened to? Absolutely not. And were they followed up with? No. So escalation integrity is not simply curating as an HR team, as an ethics team, a good speak up culture where people challenge. It has to be a better speak up culture where that challenge is appropriately listened to and acted on.
I mean, it's such a sobering thought and an awful situation, that one. And lives, as I said, were lost. And that was a very visible link there too. This is dangerous, we shouldn't be doing it, to it not happening. There are other examples, aren't there, where at the beginning people couldn't have thought, well, lives will be lost through this. And yet they were. And the biggest one that everybody will know about, think about, which is still going on, is the post office.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Absolutely that. And lives were lost in the post office Horizon scandal. So the aspect there of a computer system telling an organization that hundreds of postmasters have been committing fraud, and yet having hundreds of postmasters saying, we don't think this is true, we think there's an issue, and yet the post office believing the technology, not the people, I think really diminishes the decision-making resilience and decision-making capability of leaders in that organization at the time. And as has happened now through the investigation, the company has been charged with paying £58 million in compensation. That was back in, I think that's 2019. As of 2025, so last year, the post office has paid 1.23 billion out to over 9,000 postmasters. So this issue
still not enough.
It's blown up massively. But if you again look down this framework to say, what are the consequences if we get this wrong? We've got, and then the scale of this baffles me, Gillian. If you're sitting there and going, we've got 900 initially postmasters, they're saying that this is an incorrect assumption from a piece of technology. We think the technology is right. If we're right, they've committed fraud, that's bad. The consequences are they'll go to jail and they'll lose money. But if we're wrong, and people lose their homes, lose their partners, lose their jobs, and lose their lives, are we willing to stake all of that and our reputation and the consequences on this irreversible decision to prosecute 900 people. And I think that's where, again, you walk through this framework and say, people have raised their concerns. What are we doing about it? We're not listening. How can we do better? Are our systems and incentives working towards a good purpose here? Maybe our systems aren't quite up to scratch. Have we looked at the unintended consequences, but we haven't considered whether people would take their life if their whole livelihood was removed from them? And as you say, I think the broader perspective here of having an advisor in the room, an HR business partner, an ethics partner, who can just say, with collaboration, have we gone through these 8 points? And it's not accusatory. It's not saying, I think we're wrong and I think you're unethical. It's saying, how confident are we that our decision resilience in this scenario is something we can be proud of?
Yeah, I mean, as we can keep saying, hindsight is a very, very exact science there. And it's easy to link back, but there were people who did speak up who, again, weren't heard or were redacted from information later on. So I guess that also links us to looking at what sort of culture does an organisation have? Is it a blame culture, or has it become a blame culture? So people, very, very quietly sit there and, don't do anything there. So when we think about HR and how they're challenging, you've already talked about being in the room. And if they are getting pressure from stakeholders, what can they do if they feel that they're being shut down? I mean, part of it makes me think, do you consider, am I in the right environment if I'm an HRBP and no one's listening to me? But what can they do?
It's really tricky. And I really felt for the HR business partners that I worked with, and I did my best to try to support them in those conversations as a bit of an ally. We all need allies in many respects, because the HR business partners, that intersection between the business, the regulations, the policies, the processes, and the people who are there questioning those processes, policies, and approaches, but also leadership who are there to uphold these same principles and processes and deliver with the high pressure that they have, being accountable for the business. So one approach that I really like is by thoughtful questions that aren't blaming. So some of the challenges I've got wrong in the past, some of my mistakes, have been going into a meeting and saying, I think you've done this and I think that's wrong, and therefore I would suggest something else. And that's assigning blame. That's me going, I'm right, you're wrong, here's a mistake, let's make it public and let's do something differently. And when people feel blamed and defensive, it's almost like that's an embarrassing wound to their ego. If there's one thing we don't want to address in these challenges, it's attacking someone's ego.
Yeah, because the more exposed they feel, I guess, the more they want to fight back.
Completely. They retreat, they defend, they want to try to justify instead of explain. So if you ask, why did you do that? Most people will go, oh, well, it was the systems and it was this. Whereas if we say, how could we have done it better? We changed why questions to how questions. Then it gets people going, okay, I'm not being blamed. This is okay. How can we do things differently in the future? And there's quite a useful method I use called the UHT method, which is I understand, however, therefore. So you'd say, I understand why we put profit above people. We've got shareholders that are putting pressure on you. However, that decision led to 358 people dying in plane crashes that we knew about beforehand. Therefore, do we think there might be other ways in which we can prevent this in the future? And it removes blame, because you haven't said your decision, ignored the whistleblowers, caused deaths, and now we've got a reputational crisis. It says, I understand why you did it. You've got huge profit pressures.
Yeah, as you said, you didn't wake up thinking, let's go in and cause a disaster. But what that made me think about also then, which I think is so closely linked, and you and I have talked about many times when we've been in internal audit and training them, is the lessons learnt mentality, particularly the lessons learnt mentality versus the lessons recorded mentality. And I'm wondering whether if HR took more of a role in saying, what lessons have we learned, not just at the end of a project, but right here and right now, in the middle of a project. They could kind of stem some of these things happening before it got out of control.
Completely. And putting that time aside for learning before we need to recover from something. So it's very easy to say, great, we've gone through an ethical crisis. We need to get ethical decision making in as a workshop now for all of our leaders so that it never happens again. Let's get it in beforehand. And you and I know this, that the learning and development field is one of those areas, again, where we don't want to be in companies where we say we support learning and development, but actually we never put time aside for that. It's a struggle to convince leadership to put that 10%, 5%, 15 minutes a week towards personal development, because they're thinking in terms of financial cost. 15 minutes a week per 2,000 people equates to X amount of money that I'm going to be spending on something that isn't delivery focused. So I think that's really important, Gillian, that the learning from experience, the learning on the job in the moment, and the preemptive learning here, so that when something does occur, we've already got a framework like this ready in your toolkit. You can whip it out and say, great, let's apply purpose, let's apply escalation, let's think about the consequences. And only through that habitual testing will we start to build it into a culture of ethical decision-making resilience.
That's so true. And I think, obviously we're starting to run out of time, and so I can't open this field as wide as I like, but I think when we're on our workshop, we will be talking about this some more. And that's the DEI field and what's been happening over the last couple of years, certainly the last year, where, we saw kind of 5 years ago, lots of really well-intentioned DEI work beginning. And then changes happened, things happened. People are like, well, perhaps we won't do that, or perhaps we'll do that because. And, they said the death of DEI, didn't it? It lost its way, or organizations started to get twitchy and think, well, maybe we don't want a DEI person, maybe we shouldn't call it that. And for me, that moved away from my values, and I was very, very clear about it. We do a lot of women's development, and when people are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't do women's development, it was quite hard, because it's like, why would we hide things? That moves away from our values.
Completely. And you're applying this business framework to personal ethics as well, Gillian, which you can absolutely do. We've spoken a lot today on the business application of integrity, but this comes down to how comfortable are we feeling with the decisions we're making as individuals alongside our business personas. So you're right, if you're there going, this isn't aligned to my own values, I think the risk here to others and myself is too great, and I don't want to sit silently. I think I can repurpose myself to some other initiative. That's really important. I wanted to sort of pass on maybe the final thoughts of saying, if you can take one thing away from either today or the workshop we're going to be doing in a few weeks' time, it's how do you nurture good character, so that you can ask yourself, am I proud of the person this decision is showing me to be? Am I proud of the person this decision is showing me to be? And if you've got someone in your life you're really counting as a role model, your parents, your grandparents, your manager, someone really important to you, think about how they would reflect on your decision. And if there's any discomfort there, then perhaps you need to think about going through this framework again, or bringing it in and just reconsidering the approach you've taken.
Wow, that's so confronting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people, kind of their gut tells them, yeah, I don't think, or I think people might think this or say this, but applying that thought, it's like personal reputational risk as well, there at the end. And I think, thank you, Ben. I could talk about this forever because it's so relevant. And as I said, if you're a leader watching this, I'm sure it's very, very relevant. Maybe you feel you're not being heard on your project, but our BP as well. I think it is so insightful. So much there, it's really hard to summarize. But, some of the things I was really hearing is about that early intervention, that courage to speak up, that values application, and kind of really thinking with the end in mind and what could happen. And that's where you apply previous lessons learnt. And we just talked about kind of gut instinct and intuition. And if your intuition is shouting something, I mean, I once heard somebody say, listen to your body whisper before it starts to scream. And I think that can be the same thing with intuition, isn't it? If there's that bubbling feeling, just not comfortable with the direction this is going, then you're probably right, and what you're going to do. So if this has resonated with you today, as we said, we are running a free workshop. It's part of our series for HRBPs and Lunch and Learns. It's not a seminar, so if you're going to join up, please expect to come and have a chat like we're doing today, talk about business partners, share learning from your organisation, hear it from other organisations. It's called the HR Connect and Inspire Workshop. It's on April the 27th. You're on a LinkedIn Live, so the links will be coming out to you. It's very practical, very interactive, and you can ask Ben questions and think about it. And of course, it's in a very confidential environment because we're all HR people and that's what we do. So once again, Ben, thank you so much for your incredible insights there. And I'm very much looking forward to working with you on the workshop on the 27th of April.
Wonderful. Likewise, really looking forward to it.
Thank you.